first started in photography, like many of you, I had an APS-C camera because at the time, around 2009-ish, that's pretty much all there was. There were full frame cameras around, but nothing that us mere mortals could afford getting into the game, you know. I quickly then upgraded, if you like, to the Nikon D600 and D800 a few years later. Obviously big old sensors and all that, but if you know anything about the Nikon D600, you will know that it had a notoriously messy shutter, by which I mean it used to spit garbage all over the sensor, which resulted in me having to get the sensor cleaned like every 2 or 3 months. And on one of these trips to the shop to get the sensor cleaned, the guy in the shop had said to me, "Haven't you considered mirrorless yet?" And at the time I didn't see the point. It was only when I got into YouTube that I decided to make the switch over to Sony for mirrorless. But anyway, he had said to me he had just recently got the Olympus EM10, I think it was the Mark 1, given the year it was. And he was telling me about the specs of the thing and how he shoots almost all of the same kinds of things that I do. You know, the wedding stuff, the landscape stuff, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, all right, go on. So he was telling me the specs, a Micro Four Thirds sensor, 16 megapixels, like 12 stops of dynamic range, and all this time I'm like, tiny sensor versus huge sensor, 16 megapixels versus 36 megapixels, 12 stops of dynamic range versus 14.5 stops of dynamic range. Why would the hell would you choose the camera like that? So fast forward to now, when photographer me is much more mature and learned and realizes that 12 stops of dynamic range is pretty much all you need. 12 megapixels is also pretty much all you need. And it's all about you, how you use the gear and how you perform as a photographer. So recently, I am getting to the point, just bear with me. So I recently, it's always been there, these smaller sensors, compact, you know, fit in your pocket kind of cameras, especially now for the last year and a half now, doing street photography, more discreet and good performance is key for me, which is why I gravitated towards the Sony APS-C system. The A6000 and the A6300, which ended up in a river, don't ask, are some of my favourite cameras I've ever used. But I've been looking at Micro Four Thirds, and a little bit ago I was like, I'm going to go and I'm going to get myself an EM5. I'm not going to go EM10, I'm not going to go entry level, I'm not going to go EM1 because I don't need another pro camera. EM5, I mean, and pro camera, I mean, come on, the specs in these cameras, ridiculous. I'm looking at the EM5 and I'm holding off and I'm holding off, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of cameras, I don't really need another camera, so this was like pure curiosity, pure want. And then I saw an EM10 Mark II for £57, and I obviously was like, that's got to be broken, because the average price of those cameras is here at least around 150, 200 kind of bracket. So I looked at the listing and it said that the screen was broken. So I was like, okay, does the EVF work? The EVF did work. All of the controls are usable and accessible via the EVF. So I was thinking, well, for street, I could live with that, you know. So I gambled on it basically, and I threw the £57 at it, and it's completely changed my mind about Micro Four Thirds. I was out here the other night with the EM10 Mark II, just down there on that crossing there, just doing some light trails, and honestly, even with the kit lens, it performed really, really well. Here it is, this is the EM10 Mark II, and here is what's wrong with the screen. Are you ready for this? Whoop. It just doesn't work until it gets there. And then it works perfectly. £57! Bargain! Alright, so let's talk about this little camera in relation to one of my other favourite small cameras, the Sony a6000. Now, the Sony has this beat out in terms of megapixels and sensor size, but beyond that, they're either on par or this outdoes the Sony by quite a bit. Now, ISO performance on both cameras is about the same, up to about 1600 ISO, but with a camera like this and like the Sony a6000, I'd be reluctant to use it above 1600 ISO anyway. Generally speaking, I like to keep the ISO down at about 800 as a cap, and the images look fantastic. In terms of ISO performance and where you need to use your ISO, this has 5-axis image stabilization built in. So that means you can bring down your ISO and slow down your shutter speed and still get the shot depending on the situation. So your images from this may even be cleaner. Now, in terms of autofocus, most people associate Sony with good autofocus, and the a6000 is no different, but this has the added advantage of eye autofocus as well. The Sony has face detect, but this has face and eye detect. So a little one-up for the Olympus. Now, this isn't me fanboying over Micro Four Thirds and like, oh, I'm switching to Micro Four Thirds, it's the best thing ever. That's not true. There is no best camera. I have full frame, I have APS-C, I have Micro Four Thirds, I have tiny little 1x17 number sensors. They all have a job, and for their own job, they all look fantastic. This is no different, but what I would say is you don't really need APS-C and Micro Four Thirds. It's like the performance is so close that you would choose one system over the other. The added bonus of the Micro Four Thirds system, though, is that with Micro Four Thirds lenses, you have the option to use Olympus and Panasonic Lumix bodies. This is the same kit lens that I've been using on the Lumix GF2 in my videos, and also I can put obviously my M42 to Micro Four Thirds adapter on here and use a vintage lens if I want. So in conclusion, when people would have asked me what camera should I buy to get into photography, I would always say something like the Sony a6000 or the Canon 200D DSLR, which is kind of comparable to the a6000 in terms of specs. But that's mainly because I had overlooked the fact that Micro Four Thirds existed. My previous experience with Micro Four Thirds with the GF2 and the Olympus Pen, EPL3, which one was it? EP3, EPL3? Yeah. Had basically made me rule them out as an option, but this is absolutely on par with these cameras, if not better in many areas. And you put good glass on here and you're going to get great images. I've just ordered myself the 45mm f1.8 from Olympus, and I'm going to get myself the 25mm 1.8 as well. And yeah, I can see me having a lot of fun with this. So much so that I might buy myself an EM1 in the new year. I might. Watch this space. Alright, so I'm going to leave you with some more images that I've shot with the EM10 Mark II, many of which were shot with this kit lens, just a plastic Lumix 14-42 kit lens, or an adapted vintage lens like the Helios 44M. But yeah, let me know, do you use Micro Four Thirds, do you use Olympus? And if any of you actually have an Olympus EM1 Mark II, I'd love to hear from you in the comments with, tell me what you think of the camera, what your uses are and all that kind of thing, because that's the one that I've got my eye on for the new year. So thank you very much for watching, hope you enjoyed the images, and I'll see you in the next one.